Imagine being a mother of three, working tirelessly, doing everything you can to create a better life for your children. You dream of stability, love, and peace. And just when you're finally starting to feel like you've found it, a man you trusted shatters your world. Reanita Williams' story is one of dreams destroyed and love turned deadly. But what led to her tragic death? Stay with us as we uncover the chilling events that started with nothing more than a simple apology. Reanita Williams was only 27 years old when her life was taken. A loving mother of three, she was the heart and soul of her family. Reanita lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, a city where many struggle to make ends meet, but where she had built something special. She worked tirelessly as an interior designer, transforming ordinary houses into beautiful homes, turning her dreams into reality. She wasn't just known for her talent, she was known for her heart. Friends and family spoke of her warmth, her dedication to her children, and the quiet strength that radiated from her. She was the kind of woman who, despite life's hardships, never stopped believing in love and in the possibility of a brighter future. But despite all her accomplishments, despite the beauty she had created around her, something dark and unexpected loomed on the horizon. Reanita's life was about to take a devastating turn, one that would tear apart everything she had worked so hard to build. She had no idea that the man she had trusted, the man she had opened her heart to, would soon become the one who would destroy it all. She was on the verge of something bigger. Her business was growing. Her children were thriving. But in the background, lurking beneath the surface, was a relationship that was turning toxic. The man she had taken into her home, believing he would be a father figure for her kids, was hiding dark secrets of his own. And Reanita, with her boundless hope and her deep belief in love, never saw the betrayal coming. The storm was quietly brewing, and when it finally hit, it would leave nothing but wreckage in its wake. Shreveport, Louisiana, a place where dreams are often overshadowed by struggle. A city where, for many, survival is the goal, not success. And this is where Jonathan Robinson's story begins. Born and raised in one of Shreveport's toughest neighborhoods, Jonathan's early life was shaped by violence, crime, and hardship. But for all the darkness surrounding him, he managed to put on a mask of charm, one that was impossible to ignore. At 37, Jonathan entered Reanita's life like a breath of fresh air. He was everything she thought she needed: confident, attentive, the kind of man who made her feel like she was the center of his world. For a woman who had struggled through a past full of disappointment, Jonathan seemed like the answer to her prayers. He stepped in with promises of love, stability, and protection. And for a time, he played the part perfectly. But lurking beneath that smooth exterior was a past Reanita could never have imagined. Jonathan wasn't just a man with a few mistakes. He was a man whose mistakes were carved deep into his history. He had spent years in and out of prison, charges of violence, assault, and drug offenses marking his record like a warning that Reanita never saw coming. At first, it didn't matter. Jonathan was the man who brought Reanita roses, who shared quiet moments with her children. He promised to be the protector she'd always longed for. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, cracks began to show. Little signs at first: his temper when things didn't go his way, his need to control, his jealousy creeping into their relationship. It was as though he had two faces, one charming, the other frightening. And while Reanita was caught up in the whirlwind of this passionate new relationship, she couldn't see that Jonathan's darker side was beginning to rise, like a ticking time bomb. It wasn't just his criminal past she had to worry about. It was the violence within him, waiting to strike when least expected. And for Reanita, that moment would come soon enough. The man she thought was her protector would soon reveal himself as the very thing she feared the most. What started as a promising relationship soon became a powder keg, just waiting for the right spark to set it off. Reanita had always believed in the power of love, the possibility of building a future with someone who truly cared. But as her relationship with Jonathan deepened, something didn't feel right. At first, the signs were subtle: a growing distance between them, a slight coolness in his words, a lingering unease she couldn't explain. It was as if Jonathan was pulling away, but she couldn't figure out why. Reanita had always trusted him, believed in the future they could build together, but this feeling, it was unsettling. What she didn't know, and what Jonathan carefully hid from her, was that he wasn't just with her. He had been in a long-term relationship with another woman, Nancy. This was the first crack in the perfect facade he had created. As the truth came to light, it sparked a rivalry that would soon unravel everything. Nancy, the woman Jonathan had been with before, learned about Reanita. The two women, caught in a dangerous love triangle, began to clash. it wasn't just behind closed doors. This confrontation played out in public, where Jonathan's manipulation only fueled the flames. Social media became a battlefield, with each woman exchanging words, calling each other out for the world to see. What had once been a private issue had turned into an ugly spectacle. Reanita, who had once lived a peaceful life, was now thrust into a storm of jealousy and anger. She never imagined her life would spiral into a war over a man who claimed to love her. But as the online messages flew, the tension only grew. Jonathan sat back, letting the two women fight for his affection, knowing full well the power he held over them both. Reanita had always been the calm one, the one who kept things together for her children and her community. But now, she found herself swept up in a rivalry that was beyond her control. Her peaceful home had become a battleground. The emotional toll of this growing conflict was unmistakable. The constant pressure, the feelings of betrayal, and the relentless drama left Reanita questioning everything. Was Jonathan the man she thought he was? Or had she been blind to the truth all along? The storm was only gathering strength. And in the eye of it all, Reanita was about to make a choice, one that would change her life forever. Imagine standing at a crossroads, knowing that every choice you make could either lift you up or drag you further down. That's where Reanita stood after her breakup with Jonathan. She had made the difficult decision to walk away from a toxic relationship, one that had caused her more pain than she ever imagined. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But with the support of her children and the strength she'd built over the years, Reanita felt a sense of freedom, a glimmer of peace that had been missing for far too long. She took to social media, announcing her newfound clarity with a post that read like a victory, finally choosing peace over drama. It was a moment of triumph, a small step toward reclaiming her life. But what she didn't expect was for Jonathan to refuse to let go. Jonathan's calls grew more desperate, more frantic. At first, he pleaded with her, promising he'd change, begging for another chance. But with each passing call, his words grew more desperate, more manipulative. Reanita, who had already endured so much, was now faced with the weight of his demands. Despite her best intentions to move on, she began to feel the pull. Jonathan's charm, his promises of love, and the memories of better times began to cloud her judgment. Slowly, she allowed him back into her life, convinced that maybe, just maybe, things could work. But deep down, Reanita knew she was walking a dangerous path, one where the lies had already begun to build once again. The online drama between her and Nancy continued to simmer, boiling over with each new post, each angry exchange. The bitter words between the two women played out in public for everyone to see. Each was determined to stake her claim, to prove her place in Jonathan's life. Reanita's calm, measured demeanor from the past was now replaced by a woman locked in a battle, caught between two forces she couldn't control. And Jonathan? He played both women against each other with a cruel indifference, watching as they fought for his attention and affection, all while never fully committing to either of them. As the tension between Reanita and Nancy grew, the stage was set for the final confrontation. But no one, not even Jonathan, could have predicted how far this twisted game would go. The drama, once contained to words on a screen, was about to spill over into something far more dangerous. It was a morning like any other, or so Reanita thought. She had no way of knowing that the peace she had finally begun to rebuild was about to be shattered. On April 12, 2018, Jonathan Robinson, driven by jealousy, rage, and a need for control, made his way from Houston to Shreveport. This wasn't just another visit. This was a mission, one that would change everything. Jonathan arrived, his mind set on one thing: revenge. He wasn't coming to apologize. He wasn't coming to talk things through. He was coming to punish Reanita. Armed with a gun, Jonathan stormed into her life once more, but this time, it wasn't to win her back. It was to break her in the cruelest way possible. His plan was simple: force Reanita to publicly apologize on Facebook Live. The reason? To humiliate her, to make her regret the social media posts that had embarrassed him and his other woman, Nancy. He wanted to show them both who was really in control. Reanita, already terrified by Jonathan's presence, was thrust into a nightmare. As he demanded the apology, her mind raced. Could she talk her way out of this? Could she make him see reason? But the fear was too much. The air in the room was thick with tension as Jonathan grew impatient, his temper flaring with each second. She hesitated, every fiber of her being told her not to comply, not to give in to this madness. But Jonathan was holding the gun, and his fury was undeniable. The man she once trusted, the man she thought could protect her, now held her life in his hands. Just do it, he demanded. His voice was cold, and the gun he held only made his words more menacing. Reanita's fear was palpable. Her hands trembled, and her voice cracked as she spoke. The apology, forced and hollow, escaped her lips. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was wrong." But it was too late. Jonathan wasn't looking for an apology. He wasn't looking for closure. He was looking for a reason, any reason to justify his rage. And when he didn't get what he wanted, when Reanita's compliance didn't calm him, the situation escalated in a flash. With the camera still rolling, Jonathan pulled the trigger. The world watched as a woman's life was taken in an instant. The last moments of Reanita's life, her fear and her surrender, captured forever in the digital ether. Her final words hung in the air, an eerie echo of the hope that once filled her heart. In one brutal moment, everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, was gone. And Jonathan? He had made a choice that would haunt him forever. The terror that Reanita felt in those moments is something no one should ever have to experience. What began as a painful but familiar confrontation with Jonathan now spiraled into an unimaginable nightmare. She was trapped. Trapped not just in her home, but in a situation she couldn't escape. Jonathan had come with a gun, and now he was in control. With her mother and brother in the house, the stakes grew higher. Jonathan, already volatile, became more erratic, his temper flaring with each passing minute. The very man who had once promised her protection now held her and her family at gunpoint. His demands were clear. Reanita had to apologize, live, for everyone to see on social media. In a horrifying moment of clarity, Reanita realized the depth of her peril. She had no way out. She had no way to protect herself or her family. She could see the anger in Jonathan's eyes, feel the tension in the room, the uncertainty of what would happen next. His movements were unpredictable, pacing back and forth, every step taken with a purpose she couldn't understand. Fear gripped her heart, but even more than that, Reanita felt something worse, a crushing sense of helplessness. She had no choice but to comply. Her instincts screamed to fight, to run, to scream for help. But Jonathan had made sure that wasn't possible. Every escape route was closed, and every word she said seemed to make him more determined, more unhinged. As the camera came on, the world was about to witness something that no one should ever have to see. Reanita, visibly terrified, her face pale with fear, forced herself to speak. She tried to hold her composure, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. The apology was supposed to be a way out, a way to make him stop, to let her family go. But as the camera rolled and Reanita's words echoed through the live stream, Jonathan's anger was already boiling over. What started as a desperate attempt to defuse the situation became a performance of power, with her life as the price of compliance. Then, in a moment that no one could have predicted, Jonathan's rage reached its peak. With no warning, he pulled the trigger. The world watched in disbelief as Reanita's life was stolen in front of a camera, her fear and her final words captured forever in the digital world. And in that moment, as Jonathan stood there, the once silent room erupted into chaos. Her family, still trapped, could only watch in horror. The live stream continued, her final moments immortalized for the world to see, as the terror and violence that had been building for so long reached its tragic, irreversible conclusion. What followed was a moment that no one could have prepared for. Reanita's fate was sealed in an instant, the weight of her decision to comply with Jonathan's demands coming down on her like a crushing wave. The live stream continued, but the world watching was unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Reanita, her voice trembling, still trying to hold on to some semblance of dignity, continued her forced apology. But in that moment, the space around her was suffocating. You could feel the desperation in her eyes, the fear that gripped her soul. She didn't want to apologize. She didn't want to be here, on this stage, in front of the whole world. But Jonathan, he had made it clear that this was her only choice. Then came the sound that would forever echo in the minds of everyone who heard it. The unmistakable crack of a gunshot. The sharp, deafening noise that cut through the air like a knife. In that fraction of a second, everything changed. The life of a woman who had once been full of hope, promise, and love was taken, just like that. Reanita's final breath left her body in the same instant. The camera, still rolling, captured her last moments, her desperate attempt to survive, to make it out alive. The screen was filled with her face, twisted in pain and fear, until it all stopped. And for those who were watching, it was impossible to look away. The horror didn't end there. Reanita's mother, who had been in the house, frantic and terrified, saw the opportunity to escape. She ran, calling 911 in a panic, begging for help. Her voice, shaking with terror, was all that was left to grasp at. But by the time the police arrived, it was already too late. The damage had been done. Reanita's life had been taken, snuffed out in the blink of an eye, and the ripple effect of that one tragic moment would forever haunt those who loved her. Jonathan, having executed his rage in such a cold and calculated way, was left standing there, the gun still in his hand, as the reality of his actions began to sink in. But for Reanita's family, for her children, and for the community that once admired her, there would be no going back. This was a turning point, a devastating moment they would never recover from. The world had seen the unthinkable, and for Reanita's family, the pain of that moment would live on forever. The chaos inside that house had barely settled before Jonathan made his move. After taking Reanita's life, he fled the scene, leaving behind the wreckage of a family shattered forever. But the police weren't far behind. Within moments, law enforcement surrounded the house, preparing for what would become an agonizing, life-threatening standoff. Jonathan, the man who had just committed an unspeakable act, was now holed up in the house, refusing to surrender. The officers on the ground were already at risk, but they couldn't back down. Every step they took, every move they made, could be their last. Jonathan had already shown how far he was willing to go, and now, the officers had to carefully navigate the line between protecting themselves and ensuring that no more lives would be lost that day. For over an hour, the tension in the air was unbearable. Jonathan continued to fire at the police from inside the house, his anger and rage still apparent, even though the situation had already spiraled out of control. He was determined not to be taken, to not face the consequences of his actions. The sounds of gunshots filled the air, deafening, violent, as the officers desperately tried to contain the situation. Every moment was a gamble with lives on the line. The danger was palpable. As they waited, unsure of Jonathan's next move, a sense of dread loomed over the scene. Who would break first? The officers trying to end this standoff without further bloodshed, or Jonathan, who was hell-bent on turning the entire scene into one of destruction. In a last-ditch effort to de-escalate the situation, the police brought in Nancy, the other woman Jonathan had been involved with. She was his connection to the past, the one person who might still hold sway over him. She had been a part of this toxic triangle, and now, she was their only hope. As Nancy arrived, the police were hoping her presence would be the catalyst to bring Jonathan to his senses. Would she be able to convince him to surrender? Or would the standoff end with even more bloodshed, with more lives ruined beyond repair? The clock ticked. Every minute that passed without a resolution felt like a lifetime. Would Nancy's words reach Jonathan? Or would this standoff end in the tragic conclusion that everyone feared? The standoff was over, but the silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan Robinson, the man who had just taken a life, was now in the custody of law enforcement. As the weight of his actions began to sink in, he was escorted to a small, sterile interrogation room. There, sitting alone under harsh fluorescent lights, Jonathan was ready to face the consequences of what he had done, or so it seemed. The room was cold. His expression, empty and detached, betrayed nothing of the man who had just committed murder. The officers who sat across from him expected remorse. They expected guilt, but what they got instead was chilling. With an eerie calmness, Jonathan began to speak. His words, slow and deliberate, painted a disturbing picture of the events that had led to Reanita's tragic death. He recounted every detail with an unsettling clarity, as if he were recounting a story that had no real emotional weight. There was no panic, no urgency to explain himself. Just a cold, methodical account of how things had unfolded that fateful day. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," Jonathan said, his voice flat, almost robotic. "But she had to apologize for what she did. She humiliated me, and I needed her to see that there were consequences." As he spoke, there was a strange sadness in his voice, but it wasn't directed toward Reanita. It wasn't remorse for what he had done. Instead, it seemed to be sorrow for his own destruction, for the mess he had created for himself. His eyes, hollow and distant, told the story of a man who had lost control but couldn't admit it. He had crossed a line that he couldn't come back from, but it was the damage to his own life that seemed to weigh most heavily on his mind. The officers, who had hoped to see signs of regret, were left with a sense of unease. Was he truly sorry for taking Reanita's life? Or was this merely a reflection of a man facing the collapse of everything he had manipulated? His confession, while detailed, lacked the depth of true remorse. There was no empathy for the woman whose life he had stolen, no recognition of the devastation he had caused. Jonathan's coldness, his inability to truly grasp the weight of his actions, was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. And as the interrogation continued, the question lingered in the air. Was he truly sorry for killing Reanita, or was he just sorry for himself? The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that only comes after a life has been lost and justice must now be served. Jonathan Robinson sat before the judge, his fate sealed, as the jury delivered the only verdict they could: life in prison. But no verdict could ever bring Reanita Williams back. No amount of time in prison could undo the damage he had caused, the family he had torn apart, and the mother who would never see her children grow up. The impact of Reanita's death rippled far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Her children, young, innocent lives, would never know the love, the guidance, and the warmth of their mother. The hole left in their hearts could never be filled. Her mother, a woman who had lost not just her daughter but the promise of what could have been, was left to navigate a grief so deep it seemed endless. A community that had once admired Reanita's strength and determination was left in shock, asking the same haunting question: what led a man to murder the one person who had shown him kindness? As the verdict was read, there were no celebrations, no relief. The truth was too heavy. Jonathan's actions had robbed Reanita of her life, her future, and everything she held dear. But for the family and the community left behind, the trial was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. There was no true justice in a courtroom for a life lost in such a senseless way. While Jonathan's fate was sealed, the story of Reanita's life and death continued to haunt those who loved her. Her children would grow up without the mother they had adored, forced to carry the weight of her absence for the rest of their lives. Her family, struggling to find a way to heal, would never forget the vibrant woman who had been taken too soon. And her community, once united in love and admiration for her, was forever changed by the tragedy that struck without warning. Reanita's story stands as a chilling reminder of how easily love can be twisted, manipulated, and turned into something deadly. What began as a hopeful relationship, built on trust and affection, ended in betrayal and murder. Jonathan's cruel manipulation of both Reanita and Nancy was a poison that slowly poisoned everything it touched. His violence wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and it destroyed the lives of everyone in its path. As we remember Reanita Williams, let us reflect on the fragility of life. Let her story serve as a warning to recognize toxic relationships before they can take everything from us. Love is powerful, but when manipulated, it can become a weapon. Reanita's life was cut short, but her legacy will live on, reminding us all to protect what we hold dear and to never let the darkness of toxic relationships consume us.